Watch the territory burn. Captured healer had 30 minutes to save a Lakota prince. The afternoon sky over the Great Plains looked wide and endless, but the air felt heavy. A thin line of smoke rose in the distance, stretching across the horizon like a warning written in gray. The wind carried the smell of ash and dry grass, and even the birds seemed quieter than usual. Something was changing on the land, and everyone could feel it. Mato Wikasa walked alone near the riverbank, moving slowly and carefully. He carried a small leather pouch filled with dried plants and roots. His eyes were focused on the ground, searching for the right leaves. He knew which plants helped with fever, which eased pain, and which stopped bleeding. The land had taught him these lessons since he was a child. His grandfather had once told him, "If you listen to the earth, it will tell you how to help your people." In recent weeks, tension had been growing between the Lakota people and the soldiers stationed near their territory. The soldiers said they were protecting their supplies and expanding their control. The Lakota people said the land had always been theirs. There had been arguments, warnings, and small clashes. Nothing had fully exploded yet, but everyone knew it could. Mato did not carry a weapon. He carried knowledge. While others prepared for possible fighting, he prepared medicines. He believed that no matter what happened, someone would need healing. That afternoon, as he reached down to cut a small green plant with thin leaves, he felt something change in the air. The wind shifted. The birds suddenly flew up from the tall grass. He stood still. Then he heard it. The sound of boots stepping through dry brush. Before he could turn fully, 4 soldiers stepped out from behind the tall grass and bushes. Their uniforms were dusty. Their faces looked tired and tense. They held their rifles ready, not fired, but steady. Mato slowly raised his hands. His expression remained calm, but his eyes were sharp. He understood the situation immediately. One of the soldiers, a young man with nervous eyes, stepped forward. "You," he said, pointing. "You're the healer, aren't you?" He simply nodded once. The soldier looked back at the others. "It's him." They moved closer and tied Mato's hands with rough rope. The rope was tight, but he did not struggle. Fighting would change nothing. He watched their faces instead. They were not smiling. They were not proud. They looked worried. As they began leading him away from the river, Mato glanced once at the plants he had been collecting. The small green leaves lay forgotten on the ground. The wind brushed over them gently, as if the land itself was watching. The walk to the military camp felt longer than usual. The sun hung lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the grass. In the distance, Mato could see the outlines of tents and wagons. Smoke rose from cooking fires, but it was mixed with another kind of smoke, darker, thicker. As they approached, he noticed something strange. The camp was not calm. Soldiers were running from tent to tent. Horses were restless, pulling against their ropes. Officers were speaking in sharp, urgent voices. There was fear in the air. One of the soldiers holding him whispered to another, "If he can't do it, the captain will give the order." Mato heard the words clearly. He said nothing, but his mind began to work. If he can't do what? They brought him to the center of the camp. A large tent stood there, guarded by 2 armed men. An officer stepped out. He was older, his face lined by sun and responsibility. His uniform was clean, but his hands were shaking slightly. "So this is him," the officer said quietly. Mato stood tall despite his tied hands. He looked directly at the officer. His voice when he spoke was steady. "Why have you brought me here?" The officer studied him for a moment before answering. "There's been an accident," he said. "A serious one." Mato remained silent, waiting. The officer continued. "The son of your chief, the young prince, was injured during a clash near the ridge this morning." Mato's heart tightened, but his face did not show it. The prince was young, brave, and still learning the ways of leadership. He had often visited Mato to learn about plants and healing. The thought of him hurt brought a deep ache to Mato's chest. "He is badly wounded," the officer said. "Our doctors have tried everything they know. His condition is getting worse." For a moment, the camp seemed to go quiet around them. "Why bring me?" Mato asked calmly. The officer took a slow breath. "Because we believe you may be the only one who can help him." Mato looked at the ropes around his wrists. "You capture me," he said, "and now you ask for my help. This is not a request. It is an agreement. You have 30 minutes. If the boy survives, you will be released. If he does not," he paused, glancing toward the distant hills where Lakota homes and grazing lands lay. "If he does not, we will burn a large section of your territory in response to the attack this morning." "That is the order prepared." The words hung heavy in the air. Several soldiers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Even they understood what that would mean. Homes lost. Food stores gone. Families forced to move before winter. Mato closed his eyes briefly, not in fear, but in thought. 30 minutes. The life of one boy. The safety of many families. The weight of both resting on his shoulders. Matt. When he opened his eyes, they were clear and steady. "Untie my hands," he said. The officer nodded to one of the men, who stepped forward and cut the rope. Mato rubbed his wrists once, then held out his palm. "My medicine pouch." A soldier hurried to bring it. The small leather bag was placed carefully in his hands. "Take me to him," Mato said. They led him toward the guarded tent. As he walked, he could feel eyes on him from every direction. Some soldiers looked at him with doubt. Others looked at him with hope. A few looked ashamed. Beyond the camp, far on the hills, small figures stood watching. Lakota warriors keeping their distance but observing every movement. News had clearly spread quickly. At the entrance of the tent, Mato paused for just a second. He could hear labored breathing inside. "Quick, shallow." The officer spoke again, his voice lower now. 30 minutes, he reminded him. Mato stepped inside. The light was dim. The air smelled of sweat and medicine. On a cot in the center lay the young prince. His face was pale. A bandage wrapped around his side was stained dark. An army doctor stood nearby, looking tired and uncertain. Mato walked forward slowly. He did not rush. Panic would not help. He placed his hand gently on the prince's forehead. It was burning with fever. Outside the tent, the sun continued to drop toward the horizon. Smoke drifted through the air. Soldiers waited. Lakota warriors watched from the hills. Time had started moving. Inside the tent, the air felt thick and heavy, as if even the wind was afraid to enter. The light came from a small lantern hanging on a wooden pole, its flame shaking slightly each time someone moved. Shadows stretched across the canvas walls, rising and falling like silent spirits watching everything. The young prince lay on a narrow cot in the center. His long dark hair was damp with sweat and stuck to his forehead. His chest rose and fell in short, uneven breaths. A rough bandage was wrapped tightly around his side, already dark from dried blood. His lips were pale, and his hands trembled slightly against the thin blanket covering him. Mato stepped closer, his movements slow and controlled. He could hear the ticking of a small metal watch in the hand of the commanding officer standing near the entrance. The sound felt louder than it should have been. Each second seemed to push against the healer's back. The army doctor stood nearby, worry clear in his tired eyes. He looked at Mato not with pride, but with desperation. "We cleaned the wound," the doctor said quickly. "We removed the cloth fragments. The bullet passed through, but the fever keeps rising. He won't wake up." Mato did not answer immediately. He placed his hand gently on the prince's forehead. The heat was strong. He then moved his fingers to the boy's neck, feeling for his pulse. It was fast and weak at the same time, like a frightened bird trying to escape a cage. He carefully began unwrapping the bandage. The cloth stuck slightly to the skin, and the doctor stepped forward as if to warn him. But Mato lifted his hand slightly, signaling for patience. When the bandage was fully removed, the wound was visible. It had been cleaned harshly, leaving the surrounding skin red and irritated. The body was fighting not only the injury, but also the strong chemicals that had been used. Mato spoke calmly. "Warm water," he said. "Not too hot. Clean cloth. And I need space." The officer nodded, and a soldier rushed to follow the orders. The tent slowly cleared until only Mato, the doctor, and the officer remained inside. The doctor hesitated before speaking again. "Will he survive?" Mato looked at the wound, then at the prince's face. "If his spirit stays strong, he will," he replied quietly. Outside the tent, the sounds of the camp continued. Horses stomped nervously. Boots moved quickly across dry ground. Low voices whispered. Word had spread that the healer was inside. Some soldiers stood close to the tent, pretending to adjust their gear, but really listening for any sign of hope. Farther away, beyond the camp, Lakota warriors remained on the hills. They had seen Mato being taken. They had seen him enter the tent. They did not move, but they watched carefully. Smoke from small campfires drifted between them and the soldiers, blurring the space between both sides. Inside, the warm water arrived. Mato dipped a clean cloth into it and began gently washing around the wound. His hands were steady. Every movement was careful, almost respectful. He removed the harsh smell left by the army's medicine and replaced it with calm, clean touches. The prince let out a weak sound, barely more than a whisper. His eyelids fluttered but did not open. Mato leaned closer. "You are not alone," he said softly, Lakota. "Stay with us." "How much time?" he asked quietly. The doctor glanced at the watch. 15 minutes have passed. The pressure inside the tent grew stronger. Even the doctor began breathing faster. Matto reached into his leather pouch and carefully removed small dried leaves, roots, and a wrapped bundle of crushed herbs. Each item had been gathered with care from the land. He placed them on a small wooden table and began preparing them. He asked for a bowl and a flat stone. When they were brought, he crushed the herbs slowly, mixing them with a few drops of water until they formed a thick paste. The smell of the plants slowly filled the tent, replacing the sharp scent of chemicals. It was earthy and calming, like rain touching dry soil. The doctor watched closely. "What does it do?" he asked. "It cools the fever," Matto replied. "It tells the body to rest instead of fight." "Make it work," he said quietly, though there was less force in his voice now. Matto gently applied the herbal paste around the wound, careful not to press too hard. The prince's breathing trembled, then steadied slightly. It was a small change, but noticeable. The doctor leaned closer and placed his fingers on the prince's neck again. "His pulse," he whispered. "It's still weak, but not getting faster." Matto nodded. "The body is listening." Outside, a sudden gust of wind pushed against the tent walls. The lantern flame flickered wildly for a moment before settling again. Dust drifted across the camp. The officer stepped closer. "You understand," he said in a low voice. "If he does not survive, my men are prepared to act." There was no anger in his eyes, only calm understanding. "I understand," he said. But inside his heart, he felt the weight of those words. He imagined the grasslands burning, the homes, the animals running in fear, the elders struggling to escape. He imagined winter coming without shelter. He pushed the images away and focused only on the boy before him. The prince's hands moved slightly under the blanket. His fingers twitched, then relaxed. Sweat rolled down his temple. Matto asked for more clean cloth and carefully wrapped the wound again, this time gently, allowing space for the skin to breathe. He adjusted the blanket and placed a cool, damp cloth on the prince's forehead. The doctor leaned in again. "Talk to him," he said. "Sometimes they respond." His voice was low but firm. He spoke in Lakota, reminding the boy of the river where he used to fish, of the stories told around the fire, of the lessons about courage and responsibility. He reminded him that a leader does not leave his people behind. The officer checked the watch again. 5 minutes, he said. The words felt sharp, like a blade cutting through silence. The prince's breathing suddenly became shallow again. His chest barely moved. The doctor looked up quickly, fear crossing his face. "He's fading." Matto placed both hands gently on the prince's shoulders. "Stay," he whispered firmly. "Your people need you." Outside, several soldiers stood with torches prepared but not lit. They waited for the officer's signal. No one spoke loudly. Even they seemed uncertain about what they were about to witness. On the hills, Lakota warriors noticed the movement near the camp. Their bodies grew tense, ready for whatever might come next. Inside the tent, the air felt still. The lantern flame burned quietly. Sweat dripped down the doctor's temple. The officer's watch ticked again. 3 minutes. The prince's chest moved slightly stronger this time. A faint breath escaped his lips. Not steady, but present. The doctor's eyes widened. "There," he whispered. "He's still with us." He kept speaking softly, encouraging, steady. He placed one hand over the prince's heart, feeling its rhythm. It was weak, but not disappearing. 2 minutes. The prince's eyelids fluttered again. His fingers tightened slightly around the blanket. A soft sound escaped his throat. Not words, but life. The officer stepped forward, his face no longer hard, but uncertain. He watched the boy carefully, as if seeing him for the first time not as a rival leader's son, but simply as a young human fighting to survive. 1 minute. The prince took a deeper breath. Not strong, but clearer than before. His chest rose higher, then fell in a more natural rhythm. The doctor checked the pulse again. His voice shook slightly. "It's still weak," he said, "but it's steady." The officer lowered his watch slowly. The 30 minutes were nearly over. Matto kept his hands steady on the prince, his voice calm and firm. "You are not finished," he whispered. Outside, the torches remained unlit. Inside, hope, small but real, began to grow. The tent remained quiet, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, as if even the air is waiting for something to happen. The prince's breathing was still weak, but it was steady for the moment. The herbal scent filled the space, mixing with the smell of sweat and dust. Outside, boots shuffled against dry ground. No one wanted to speak too loudly. Matto did not move away from the prince. He kept one hand lightly over the boy's heart, feeling its rhythm. Each beat felt like a fragile promise. He knew the danger was not over. A fever could rise again. The body could grow tired. 30 minutes had passed, but the true battle inside the prince was still going on. The commanding officer stood near the entrance of the tent, staring at his watch even though the time limit had already ended. His jaw was tight. He had made a threat earlier, one that could have changed the land forever. Now he stood in silence, unsure of what to say next. The army doctor wiped his forehead and looked at Matto with a mix of relief and doubt. "He's alive," the doctor said quietly, "but he is still very weak." "Life is a small flame," he replied softly. "If you protect it, it grows. If you rush it, it fades." The officer stepped forward. "You said 30 minutes," he said. "It has been more than that." "There was no fear in them." "You said 30 minutes to save him," he answered calmly. "He is still here." The officer did not respond. He looked at the prince again. The boy's chest rose and fell in slow rhythm. It was not strong, but it was no longer fading away. That alone had changed everything. Outside the tent, whispers moved through the camp. Some soldiers had already lowered their torches. Others had stepped back, unsure whether they would still receive an order. The mood had shifted. What had felt certain now felt uncertain. Inside, the prince suddenly stirred. His fingers twitched again, stronger this time. A faint sound escaped his lips, like someone trying to speak in a dream. Matto leaned closer. "You are safe," he said gently, in Lakota. "Stay with us." The prince's eyelids fluttered, but they did not fully open. His breathing grew uneven again, and the doctor quickly stepped closer. "The fever is still there," the doctor whispered. "It could rise again." He reached into his pouch once more and removed a small wrapped root. It was darker than the others, strong in smell. He crushed a small piece between his fingers and mixed it with water. "This will help him rest," he said. The doctor hesitated. "Is it safe?" Matto looked at him steadily. "The land has protected my people for generations. Trust it." As Matto carefully gave the prince a few drops, a young soldier standing near the entrance shifted nervously. He had been the one who helped capture Matto near the river. His face still carried guilt. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Why are you helping him?" Matto heard him clearly. He did not look angry. He did not look proud. He simply answered, "Because he is alive." The soldier swallowed. "But we tied you. We threatened your land." Matto finally turned his head slightly. "If I let him die because of anger," he said calmly, "then I would lose more than land." The words hung in the air. The officer looked at the young soldier, then back at Matto. Something in his expression changed. The anger that had been there earlier was now mixed with thought. Outside, the wind picked up again, pushing against the tent walls. The sky was slowly turning darker as evening approached. The hills beyond the camp still held Lakota warriors watching every movement. They had seen the torches lower. They had seen no smoke rising from their homes. But they did not leave. They waited. Inside, time moved differently now. The sharp pressure of the 30-minute threat had passed, but a new kind of tension had replaced it. The tension of recovery. The prince's breathing suddenly grew shallow again. The doctor quickly checked his pulse. "It's weaker," he said. The officer stiffened. "What's happening?" Matto placed both hands gently on the prince's chest. "His body is tired," he said. "It has fought hard." The prince's lips parted slightly, but no words came. His face looked pale under the lantern light. For a moment, fear returned to the tent. Matto leaned close and spoke firmly but softly. He reminded the prince of the responsibilities waiting for him. He spoke of his father, the chief, who needed his son. He spoke of the children in the village who looked up to him. He spoke of the land that would one day depend on his leadership. "You are not finished," Matto whispered. The doctor watched carefully. Slowly, the prince's breathing steadied again. Not strong, but no longer fading. His chest rose with more effort, as if he had decided to fight a little longer. The officer exhaled slowly, a breath he had been holding without realizing it. The young soldier near the entrance lowered his head. He no longer looked at Matto as a prisoner. He looked at him with quiet respect. Minutes passed quietly. The lantern flame flickered gently. The herbal scent remained calm and steady. The prince's fingers tightened slightly around the blanket. His eyelids opened just a small amount this time. His eyes were unfocused, but they were open. The doctor stepped closer. "He's waking," he said softly. Matto leaned in. "Can you hear me?" he asked in Lakota. The prince's eyes moved slightly toward the sound of Matto's voice. His lips parted again, and this time a faint whisper escaped. It was too soft to understand, but it was clear that he was trying to speak. Tears filled the doctor's eyes, though he quickly blinked them away. The officer stood still, watching this moment. The decision he had prepared earlier, the one involving fire and destruction, now felt distant and foolish. The prince's eyes closed again, but not in weakness. It looked more like rest. "He needs time," Mato said quietly. "He must sleep. The body heals when it is calm." The officer nodded slowly. "And you?" he asked. "What do you need?" "Clean water. Quiet. And no more threats." The officer gave a short, almost embarrassed nod. Outside the tent, he stepped out and looked toward his men. He raised his hand and gave a simple signal. The torches were put away. The soldiers relaxed slightly, some sitting down, others stepping back from the edge of the camp. The tension that had been ready to explode slowly dissolved into uneasy calm. On the hills, the Lakota warriors noticed the change. No flames rose. No smoke spread. They remained watchful, but hope flickered in their hearts. Inside the tent, Mata remained seated beside the prince. The doctor sat across from him, studying both the patient and the healer. "You saved him," the doctor said quietly. Mato shook his head gently. He chose to stay. The doctor nodded, understanding more than before. Night began to settle over the plains. The sky outside turned deep blue, then slowly darker. Stars began to appear one by one. The prince slept, his breathing steady. The officer returned to the entrance of the tent. He looked at Mato differently now. Not as a captured man, not as an enemy, but as someone who had carried a heavy responsibility and met it with calm strength. "The land will not burn tonight," the officer said quietly. Mato did not smile, but his shoulders relaxed slightly for the first time. Outside, the wind moved gently across the grass. The smoke that had once looked like a warning now faded into the night. Inside the tent, under the soft lantern light, a fragile peace began to take shape, not built on fear, but on the simple act of saving a life. Night settled fully over the plains, wrapping the camp and the distant hills in deep blue darkness. The stars stretched across the sky like quiet witnesses. The wind moved more gently now, carrying away the last smell of smoke. The tension that had filled the afternoon had not disappeared, but it had softened. Inside the tent, the lantern burned low. Its light was warm and steady, no longer shaking. The prince lay still on the cot, his breathing slow and more even than before. Sweat no longer covered his face. The fever had not vanished completely, but it had stopped rising. That alone felt like a small miracle. Mato remained seated beside him. He had not left his side. His posture was straight, but his eyes were tired. He watched every breath, every small movement. Healing did not end when the danger passed. It required patience. The army doctor sat on a wooden stool across from him. Earlier, he had been filled with fear and urgency. Now he seemed thoughtful. He studied the prince's chest, rising and falling. "It's steadier," the doctor said quietly. "I didn't think we would see this." Mato nodded once. "The body wants to live," he replied. "It only needs help to remember how." Soldiers spoke in low voices. Some sat near small cooking fires, no longer preparing torches, but simply trying to understand what had happened. The threat that had hung over them all evening had dissolved without a single flame being lit. The commanding officer stood a short distance away from the tent, staring into the dark hills. He could see faint shapes there, Lakota warriors still watching. They had not left. Trust was not built in one night. He understood that now. He slowly walked back toward the tent and paused at the entrance. For a moment, he simply listened to the sound inside, the prince's breathing, the soft movements of cloth. "May I enter?" he asked quietly. Mato looked up. The officer's voice no longer carried command. It carried respect. "You may," Mato answered. The officer stepped inside. He removed his hat, holding it at his side. His eyes moved to the prince first. "How is he?" he asked. "He is resting," Mato replied. "That is a good sign." The officer nodded slowly. He looked at the healer for a long moment. "I gave an order today," he said quietly. "An order that would have brought destruction." "I believe strength meant force," the officer continued. "I believe fear would solve the problem. I see now that I was wrong." The tent felt still as he spoke. "If the boy had died," the officer said, "it would have been easy to blame anger, but it would not have brought him back." Mata's voice remained calm. "Anger spreads faster than fire," he said. "It burns everything, even those who carry it." The officer lowered his eyes slightly. "You saved more than one life tonight." Mato did not accept the praise. "I did what I was taught to do," he said. "To heal when healing is needed." His hand moved slightly from under the blanket. His eyelids fluttered open just a little wider than before. The lantern light reflected faintly in his eyes. Maddow leaned forward immediately. "Can you hear me?" he asked gently. This time a soft but clear word escaped. "Yes." The doctor straightened quickly. "He's awake," he whispered. The officer stepped closer but kept his distance from the cot. The prince looked confused at first. His gaze moved slowly around the tent. When his eyes settled on Maddow, recognition appeared. "You stayed," the prince whispered weakly. Maddow allowed a small, gentle smile. "Of course." The prince tried to sit up, but Maddow placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Rest," he said. "Your body is still healing." His breathing remained calm. The officer watched this exchange carefully. He saw not an enemy leader's son, but a young person who had nearly lost his future. He saw a healer who had chosen compassion over anger. "I will send word to his father," the officer said quietly. "He should know." Outside, a messenger rode toward the hills under a white cloth raised high, a sign of peace. Lakota warriors noticed immediately. They did not raise weapons. They waited. Inside the tent, the doctor checked the prince's pulse again. It was still weak, but stronger than before. "You will need days to fully recover," the doctor said. "He will have them," the officer replied. The words carried meaning beyond simple time. Hours passed slowly. The night grew deeper. The camp remained calm. No torches were lifted. No flames were ordered. Near midnight, movement stirred outside. Footsteps approached the tent, steady and controlled. A voice spoke softly in Lakota at the entrance. Maddow looked up. The flap of the tent opened, and the Lakota chief stepped inside. His presence filled the space with quiet strength. His face was serious, but his eyes searched immediately for his son. When he saw the prince awake and breathing, his shoulders lowered slightly in relief. He stepped closer to the cot. "My son," he said softly. The prince managed a faint smile. "Father." The chief placed his hand gently on his son's forehead. He then looked at Maddow. No words were needed at first. The gratitude in his eyes said enough. Finally, the chief turned toward the officer standing nearby. The air grew still again. The officer removed his hat once more. "He will live," he said quietly. He had expected smoke on the horizon. He had prepared for loss. Instead, he stood in a tent where his son breathed peacefully. "You threatened our land," the chief said calmly. The officer did not deny it. "I did." "And yet," the chief continued, "no fire burns tonight." Silence filled the space for several seconds. Maddow remained seated between them, not as a prisoner now, but as a bridge. The chief looked at Maddow. "You chose healing over anger," he said. Maddow responded simply, "Life must be protected." The officer took a slow breath. "This conflict does not need more ashes," he said. "We can speak tomorrow without threats." The chief considered his words. He then nodded once. "Tomorrow," he agreed. The tension that had lived on the plains for weeks did not disappear in that moment. But something important shifted. A path that had been heading toward destruction turned slightly toward understanding. The chief remained beside his son for a while longer. The doctor explained the treatment. Maddow described the herbs he had used. There was no shouting, no raised voices, only quiet conversation. Before leaving, the chief turned to the officer again. "The healer returns with us at sunrise," he said firmly. The officer nodded without hesitation. "He is free." Those words carried weight. As the night slowly moved toward morning, the stars began to fade. A pale light touched the edge of the horizon. The plains looked peaceful again, as if they had never stood so close to disaster. Inside the tent, the prince slept deeply, his breathing calm and steady. Maddow stepped outside just before sunrise. He looked across the land. The grass, the hills, the distant river. No smoke rose. No homes burned. The territory remained untouched. The officer joined him outside. "You had 30 minutes, the officer said quietly. "But the choice you made will last much longer." Maddow looked at the horizon where the sun began to rise. "The land remembers everything," he said. "Tonight, it will remember that no fire came. The first light of morning spread across the plains, warm and gentle. The danger had passed. But more than that, something new had begun.